Yes, I am Keiichiro Komatsu, and please call me Kei, but the spelling is K-E, as it's presented here, K-E-I, not K-A-Y, that is very important. And I'm originally from Japan, grown between 1 and 5 in Germany, and at that time I didn't speak Japanese language, only German, because I went to kindergarten.
Yeah.
And after going back to Japan aged 5, I straightly joined primary school where I didn't speak language. So at that time I suffered a lot. And because I was a child, in the next 5 years was enough for me to speak Japanese fluently, while I almost taught German. And then after entire education until up to the undergraduate course in Japan, I started to work as a banker called the Central Cooperative Bank for Commerce and Industry, which was concentrating on financial support for SME, small and medium-sized enterprises. Because in Japan, although the economy was growing very fast after the end of the Second World War, more than 70% of people, workers, were in the category of the SMEs. So it was recognized very important to support financially to promote this SME sector, which was a government policy. Therefore, this bank was partly funded by the government and partly from the private sector. I thoroughly enjoyed it for 10 years, first in Tokyo in SMEs financing, and then as a currency trader on Wall Street in New York. And then I joined Oxford University to complete my doctorate thesis on peace and war situation. And after that, I joined the World Bank to combine my knowledge of two areas. One is international relations, studied in Oslo, and the other is economy and financing. I work and I was an economist by training, self-training. And then I joined the British government for the Department of Trade and Industry, and I was in charge of promoting international trade and investment all over the world, including Japan and the UK. So while I was working for the World Bank, I was in the developing countries, and including Madagascar and Mauritius and those countries in sub-Saharan Africa particularly. And in the DTI in the UK, I was involved in developed countries. So I could compare between the developed and the developing countries' economies. And it's also a combination between the politics, securities, and economies. And after that, I established an independent think tank called the Komatsu Research and Advisory with the delegation of KRA, and it's until up to now. That is me, and as part of my involvement in the areas, today I'm going to talk about human security, law, peace, and ethics, and particularly as case study, importance of effective and accurate communication. Actually, for any decision making, first we need accurate information to correct. Otherwise, any decision making could be wrong. And then for today's premises, I have to say, it's in international relations and war and peace. So I have to be very careful. I want to focus on various factors that could influence current affairs as facts, regardless of whether they seem to be beneficial or disadvantageous to any particular country such as Japan, US, Russia, and China, i.e., I don't want to be involved in any political argument, just we want to see it's a fact without any political biases. And because of this use of old-fashioned negotiations such as right-wing, left-wing, pro-American, anti-American, these are largely from the Cold War time, very old-fashioned. So I would want to avoid, I would avoid it. My case study, code name Magic. And the definition of codename magic is that the American intelligence in 1941, just before the beginning of American-Japanese war in the Pacific, they decoded, the American intelligence decoded messages of Japanese coded diplomatic messages, i.e., I will explain about history a little bit because probably some of you would not be very familiar with this. In 1939, Germans started invading into Benelux countries, Poland, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and then invading into France. That's the beginning of the Second World War. And from then on, over 2 years, Japan and the US were not involved in this war. And nonetheless, Britain was nearly defeated under German harsh attacks from air raids and naval attacks and so on. And therefore, the US seriously worried about the fate of the UK and wanted to support, particularly President Roosevelt administration, wanted to support Britain to survive there. And Japan side, Japan was in an entirely different environment. And even now, the British and American historians disagree whether the war involving Japan in the Far East could be part of the Second World War, or it's just a local war separate of the Second World War. The British historians tend to see the Second World War as a European war, and all the rest are some local conflicts. And Americans have very different perspective because the Second World War, in the Second World War, the US fought both in European front and Asian front. So from the American point of view, the Pacific War is simply part of the Second World War. So that already demonstrates the perspectives could be gapped between the sides. And today's theme is related to this. And in the case of Japan's concern was only in China and Russia and the Mongols and the Korean Peninsula and Southeast Asia, that sort of region. Nothing to do with Germany or France or Britain in Europe. And that's why when the US and Japan started to talk, the perception of the world event was very different. Americans were seriously concerned about the German threat, and Japan was seriously concerned about the threat posed by the Russians rather than anybody else. And for the European and Americans, Russia means Moscow. But for the Japanese, Russia means Vladivostok and Nagotoka, and it's in the Far East and the Siberia regions there. And nonetheless, Japan and the US shared its national interest against the common wisdom. Nowadays, most of the historians have possibly that Japan and the US started to fight after 2 years of the 2 years after the German invasion in New York, because the American and Japanese national interests were in conflict. But I studied carefully at Oxford for my doctorate research, and I discovered on the basis of primary sources, including military records and diplomacy records, the politician records of both sides, it was very clear the American and Japanese shared their national interest, because the US wanted to support the Britain in Europe. That means they didn't want to fight in the Pacific behind them with Japan. And in Japan's case, they were completely unsure, or they are sure they could be defeated if Russia started to invade into Japanese territory. Therefore, Japan wanted to concentrate on the Russian rather than fighting behind them in the Pacific with the US. So both countries desperately wanted to avoid any war in the Pacific. That's how the peace talks started between the sides in November 1940. And it became more intensified from April 1941. And as surprisingly to me, more than 50 times of meetings were held between the sides with a very top level of leadership, and an enormous number of telegrams exchanged. And I researched all of this on the basis of telegrams record that was 10 kilograms heavy materials within 8 months from April to December 1941. And nonetheless, any single success of the talks were recorded. If only one, even only one successful shaking hand was being seen, had been seen, then the war between the US and Japan wouldn't have happened. But all of them failed consecutively. That is very unnatural. So I started to analyze how this happened when the two countries share their national interests. And what I discovered is information for this meeting of the two countries was very wrong. And that's how I would start. And when we see this diplomatic negotiation in the lead up to the Pacific War, what is the lesson? First, the American intelligence successfully intercepted Japan's foreign office decoded messages sent to Japan's ambassador based in Washington, D.C. to negotiate directly to the American government leaders. And they intercepted it and then decoded it. Intercepting is now called sealed, and decoding is a necessary translation process. They did marvelous job. They all taught Japanese coded systems, and they invented a machine called Papa to automatically translate it into the readable code messages. I actually used that code, almost the same type of code, when I was working in New York, because our clients' information to invest in Wall Street should not be declassified, and therefore we use it. So I know how it works. It's a kind of figures, just the figures and streams of figures, and then it should be divided into normal languages. And then they have to translate it into readable English. But that was a problem because prefix images existed there, because in such kind of potentially hostile relationship between the countries, you would be biased to translate, to tend to translate negatively rather than positively of the adversary's intentions. For instance, in the case of Japan, KO, pronouncing ko or ko, would be more than 200 meanings in the dictionary. So you have to choose proper translated vocabularies from Japanese into English for each vocabulary. So it's a lot of freehands you would have how to translate it positively or negatively. And therefore, prefixed images, negative images, mean there is space for misconception through mistranslation and distortion. And intercepted communication may be misunderstood. This is in general terms in everywhere, including the US and Iraq, or Palestinians and Israelis, all the same. But there is no opportunity to correct the misunderstandings as the interception is done in secret. I mean, all sides keep it secret, so you cannot confirm whether it's accurate or not. You have to do by yourself alone. And as I mentioned, the background is like this. I already explained this, so I'll skip it right now. And the chronology leading to Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in November 1940, one bishop and one father, with the backing of U.S. Postmaster General, very high-ranking politician, visited Japan to find out if Japan was willing to join peace talks with the U.S. to avert war in the Pacific. And on the basis of the visit, the informal talks began in April 1941. And over 50 other nations, 50 meetings were held, and the enormous exchange of telegrams and other communication continued in the subsequent 8 months long between high-level officials of the two countries. All of these eventually failed despite having common national interest, unfortunately. And this resulted in Japanese Navy's attack on the US naval base in Pearl Harbor in the Pacific in December 1941. It is said that tens of millions of lives were lost in the Pacific and Asian region during the following 4-year Pacific War. That is a result of the failure of the communication. And when you are analyzing, 3 disputes point could be found, 3 major disputes between the sides. One is non-discrimination principle with regard to China, not Latin America. What I mean is that at that time, the US was not penetrating into Chinese market yet, and Japan, France, Britain, and Russia were already in the position dominating the market, and the US wanted to join it. However, US had already dominating Latin American market and expelled British traders. And when we say non-discrimination principle, or open door, or free trade at present time, whether it should be applied for all the regions in the world, or only for particular region, that is undisputed point. And also, at that time, Japan's membership in the tripartite pact with Germany and Italy. And Japan was in the camp of Germany and Italy, simply because Japan wanted to protect itself from Russian threat. And before then, Japan had Anglo-Japanese alliance against Russia. However, the Anglo-Japan alliance was under pressure and abandoned a long time ago in the early 1920s. And the Americans put pressure on Japan and the UK to abandon it, and both of the countries were reluctant and tried to make it clear, announcing that the US was not its hypothetical enemy. However, the US did not accept it. The US thought that if Japan and the US fought, then Britain would be on the Japan side. And therefore, the US continued to put a lot of pressure on Japan and the UK to abandon it. And eventually it abandoned. And that's the reason why Japan chose Germany and Italy to sandwich Russia, to put pressure on them, rather than keeping the US as hypothetical enemy of the tripartite pact. But the US this time thought that if Germany was attacked by the Americans, then Japan would start to attack Americans from behind in the Pacific. And again, whether Japanese obligation to this treaty would be automatically joining the war or independently decided whether to join or not. That is another dispute. And also the third point, withdrawal from China, establishing a ceasefire in the Sino-Japanese War. It's initially called the China Incident because there was no any declaration of war. But from 1937, Japan and China became involved in military conflicts 4 years onwards before the power. And the big issue was how Japan could pull out from China. And against the common wisdom, telling that Japan wanted to invade into China, this was a little bit different situation. Because as I said, Japan was facing Russian threat. And although already 1 million troops of Japanese were involved in China continent, and the Russians sent 1.5 million troops alongside the border with the Japanese territory. And therefore, Japan had no confidence to fight against Russians in case Russia started to attack on Japan. And around the border with Russia, Japan had only 280,000 troops, so it's nothing, not much at all. And therefore, Japan was self-motivated to pull out from China and redeploy those 1 million against the Russian border, and still it's smaller than Russian troops. And therefore, it was one of the major disputing points between the US and Japan. If the US would be in support of Japan, like the modern time US-Japan Security Pact, then Japan was very happy to withdraw from China because the US would support Japan against Russian threat. However, at that time, Hitler of Germany had already opened fire with the Soviet Union. And therefore, from the US point of view, the enemy's enemy are on their side. So they could not interrupt Russian efforts against Nazi Germany. And in that case, what to do with it? Japanese wanted to use the terminology again. Tripartite Pact is only against Russia, and we haven't fought with Russia yet, no fight at all. And the US could concentrate on defeating Germany, and we will not interrupt it. That is Japanese trial to negotiate with the US. And how these were translated into English, that is a basic question. And just how this kind of misconception can be created. One, in 1941, the American authorities proposed to promote the non-discrimination principle or open door in China by opening the Chinese market to all countries, including the US, rather than, as I said, Britain, France, Russia, and Japan. And the open door in present time is free trade. And interestingly, in the late 19th century, this open door was invented by the British. Because at that time, British wanted to penetrate China. And then after Britain dominated the market, 80% of trade and investment in China were British. British abandoned the policy to resist open door, but it's inherited by the Americans, which was still backward of British in China. And with this open door, the US emphasized it because Japan, as I said, Britain, France, and Russia had already secured a special position in China, while the US had not at all at that time, and the US wished to promote the importance of free trade to be applied to the whole world. It's very important, whole world. However, the US did not want to open Latin American market, which was dominated by the US, and British traders were already expelled from the Latin American market. So this is at modern time America first. And then Japanese side, how they understood American proposal. The Japanese believe that this principle should and will be applied to China at the same time to any other region in the world, including Latin American market. It's reasonable. If the US said, okay, both sides should open the market, no problem. Thus, Japan understood that the US position was the same as Japan's. Means they did not know the US was reluctant to open the Latin American market. So Japan did not worry and thought this was not going to be a serious disputing point. So Japan did not worry about this point and did not dispute the application of this principle. So what the US side understand, the magic, I said the intelligence translation, magic interpreters mistranslated this and virtually reversed the meaning. I mean, they said it might be feasible, Japanese position could be, it might be feasible for either country within a certain specified area to adopt a given policy, means China. And for the other party, means Latin America, with another specified area to adopt a complementary policies. So the US thought that Japan accepted that the inconsistent policies towards China and Latin America was already accepted by the Japanese. And thus the US understood, I put it in quotation because that was actually a misunderstanding, understood that the Japanese accepted it as a feasible policy to keep Latin America under the American special influence and at the same time apply the open door, means free trade, to China. Thus, the US did not worry about this point and initially did not dispute this point. But of course, this was entire on the basis of entire misunderstanding. So later it came out, the problem came out. And the reality was different. Eventually, the US and Japan disagreed over the coming status of the Latin American market. Japan insisted you have to open the market at the same time as China is going to be open. Whether it was going to be part of open or free trade or not. And both sides were deeply confused by this misconception caused by magic mistranslation. And the then Foreign Minister Togo wrote in his memos after the end of the, even after the end of the war, he said it was hard to understand why US Secretary of State Cordell Hull at the time insists that equality of commercial opportunity will soon be applied to the whole world. Why? China's equality of commercial opportunity should not be applied at the same time. Means China should be open immediately. Latin America later. And it's somewhat similar to North Korean and American argument. Your nuclear missile should be abandoned immediately from the American side. And North Korea would say it's not immediately, it takes time. And it's similar arguments. And from Japan's point of view, if Latin American openness would be happening gradually, then the opening of China must happen gradually on the same basis. But the US says immediately in China, Latin America takes time. And the US firmly believed because of the mistranslation of magic. Japan already agreed. So why Japan started to resist about Latin American issues? And that's why Americans started to reject it. And then Japanese thought that Americans already accepted it's going to be worldwide, applied worldwide. So why Americans rejected it? So both sides became deeply confused. It's never been agreed until after the Pearl Harbor attack. And to ratify the pact with Germany and Italy, Japan repeatedly tried to emphasize that she, means Japan, would act independently. In Japanese term, 自主的に from Germany and not participate automatically, 自動的に very similar term, 自主的に and 自動的に If you see in Roman letters, 自主, SHU and DO, 自動 that's only the difference. So if you are careless, then you can be very easily confused between the two terms. And the Japanese said not participate automatically in the European war in the event of the US entering it against Germany. So don't worry, if you want to go to war with Germany, then you can do it. We are not going to be involved in it. That is the meaning. However, as I said, the translation, the interpreter had to be very careful of this. And as I said, why Japan joined the trilateral attack? It's here. I already mentioned, so I'll skip this. And Japan, this is also already I explained, so I'll skip this. And Japan's intention to act independently was mentioned in the two telegrams in Japan, sent from Tokyo to the Japanese embassy in Washington, D.C. in Japanese. And because it's very similar vocabulary, 自主的に and 自動的に, the American interpreters thought it's unlikely Japan would betray Germany. So it's unlikely, say, it's going to be independent. They thought Japan realized the obligation to the pact was if America and Germany start to fight, then Japan would always automatically join. And particularly these telegrams in Japanese, the Americans thought that was a Japanese secret exchange of communication between Japan's ambassador in Washington, D.C. and the foreign office in Tokyo. Therefore, they thought that whatever the Japanese ambassadors saying to the American officials, Japan's real intention was to go to war in case the US-Germany war started. And To be more, a little bit more precise, Japan's saying is that Japan was not betraying the German, but Japan was saying, Japan thought it's reasonable to say that. In case America started to fight against Germany, then Japan had some obligation to fight on the side of Germany. But if German side attacks the US first, then it's not the Japanese law. So Japan would not join. So the point is, when the US-Germany war started, it's very important for Japan to judge which side started the war first, whether Germany or the US. And Japan said that we are going to say this judging independently means very unlikely Japan will say the US attacks Germany first, therefore we have to join the war on the side of Germany. That is the point. And it was translated as automatically as an independent because it's very similar terms and it was hard for the interpreters to believe Japanese would say independently. And then Japanese wonder whether any misunderstanding was on the side of the US. So they sent 3 times the telegrams in English saying independently. But if you are a decision maker in Washington, D.C., and said that Japanese official English terms are independent, but when we intercepted Japanese inner communication in Japanese, then that is automatically. Then which side you want to believe? That is a big issue. And eventually, American decision makers never actually saw the term independent sent in Japanese as in a proper way. And that's how they believe that the Japanese real intention can only be found in the telegrams prepared in Japanese and not in English, and it was mistranslated. That is a tragedy. And when the Japanese ambassador Cruz met Secretary of the State Komatsu and offered his proposal under the instruction given in telegram 800, number 800 from Tokyo to clarify that Japan would act independently from Germany and not participate automatically in the war in Europe. Secretary had thought he wrote after a post-war memoir, this merely recited Cruz's personal interpretations given from his viewpoint. So it's his personal, not country's idea. And Secretary had wrote in his memoirs later that I said I did not think the paper he had handed me would be of any particular help, and so dismissed. So this chance lost. This chance was missed. And even in the post-war period, some serious scholars, in this case, John Brown, Professor John Brown of Yale University, stated, in the event of American participation in the European war, Japan would automatically carry out what she understands to be the obligations of the Axis in its Recovery Act. While Japan's proposal B, or let's forget it, it said obligated the United States to unfreeze Japanese assets because in the retaliation of the Japanese attitude understood by the US, misunderstood by the US, the US frees Japanese assets at that time, and thus such a misconception assets to lift the embargo. So Japan was insisting American freeze of Japanese assets to be lifted, and instead Japan would automatically join a war against the US. That is their interpretation even after that. And the president, Komatsu, as Secretary of State at that time, said the president and I, Komatsu, could only conclude that no responsible American official could ever have dreamed of accepting them, the condition of this argument. And of course, if I were on the position of Komatsu, then I would think that in the same way, because the information he was given is entirely wrong. And therefore, there was no other way for decision making. If he knew Japanese and he knew how it's difficult to translate between the two sides under pressure. Means if you are a scholar, then you can spend 1 year or 2 years to translate accurately. But in this case, you are requested to translate within the next 24 hours or 48 hours. And even with unknown vocabularies, statement, you cannot deeply think what could be accurate. And under pressure, and he didn't know how it's difficult to translate. He was in no position to say, is it correct translation? And Ms. Rao from China, this is another example of different type. Dramatic misconception seen in the Southern District we discussed here in the question of the withdrawal from China, as I mentioned. And myself, researchers introduce an example of a distortion or a meaning made by magic rather than an example of a synchronous translation. Distortion is another product coming from the original prefix images. In this, so ask me to listen. For the people in Skype, is it okay? Yes, so I will continue. And the Tokyo offer to start the video from the rest of China except North China, Inner Mongolia, and the Hainan Islands, simultaneously with the establishment of peace in accordance with arrangements to be made in Japan and China. And the withdrawal will be completed in 2 years. I mean that if China and Japan settle down for ceasefire, then with the certain places, as exception, all the rest of the territories, Japan would start to withdraw immediately, and it takes 2 years to withdraw completely. That was the idea. And then the trouble is regarding these specific areas means North China, Inner Mongolia, and the Hainan Islands, exception of the regions. And for these specific areas, Tokyo stated that the troops will remain for a necessary period of time after the establishment of peace between Japan and China. The question is, the important question was, however, how long would be a necessary period? How it would mean? And the Japanese had a problem, inner problem, because within Japan there are various opinions, including military, for how to interpret this necessary period. And the extremists were saying British had a concession with China on the contract basis for 99 years. So some extremists in Japan said it should be 99 years to start to withdraw. And some people said 25 years, as mentioned here. Some people said 5 years. And a variety of opinions were there. And Ambassador Nomura at that time thought that this was, Foreign Minister Togo thought that if they insisted for 99 years out of question, the US would not accept. And 25 years is still too long. And realistically, 5 years was the maximum the US could accept. That was what he thought. But this was a secret negotiations, not open to the public. If Japanese government suddenly said 5 years, then the rest of people with opinions of 25 years or 99 years would be resisting. And it's including military. So it could be very chaotic. So the Prime Minister said that should the US government respond positively to either of the Japanese proposal, Japan would have to make a further compromise. He agreed with Prime Minister Tojo. However, he wanted to keep it vague until the US actually asked Japan or to put pressure on Japan to make it clear. And that's the reason why. Japanese accurate translation of message sent to the US is that it's mentioned there. In case the United States asks what the necessary period of time will be, we will respond that we have in mind 25 years, although at this time to negotiate strictly on the abstract term necessary time. Because if we were to state clearly the necessary period for stationing troops, rather clarifying the matter, we fear it would confuse the situation. You know what I mean? This is the meaning. Internally in Japan, if we clearly say 25 years, or even 25 years or shorter, then that would cause confusion in Japan, and it would not be possible to get the ratification of Japan's position with the US to about the war. And therefore, we don't want to make it clear. But if the US put pressure on it, then first, let's say 25 years. And if the US said, if this is overcome, this 25 years length could be shorter, then the US would accept the proposal. Then we have to accept it, means to be shorter. That was the agreement between Foreign Minister Togo and Prime Minister Tojo at that time. However, what the US translated was that they didn't understand Japanese internal politics, and they did not understand quite well of what it's really meant in linguistic sense. So what they said was that they said on the matter of duration of occupation, whenever pressed to give a clear statement, we have hitherto couched our answers in vague terms. I want to use Ambassador Nomura as indecisive yet as pleasant language as possible to euphemize. That was giving a very negative, hostile image, very cunning image of Japan's intention for the American readers, and particularly the top leadership of them. And there were nothing, if you be accurate in Japanese original sentences sent as telegram, there was nothing that these terms such as whenever, pressed, hitherto, vague, indecisive, yet as pleasant language as possible, or euphemized. And this was simply a kind of interpretation on the basis of the interpreted prefix images. Thus, it was obvious that the magic interpreters tried to explain it by themselves, their own opinion of what must have been the meaning of the Japanese message by adding these terms. And after the war, there was a Tokyo trial to discuss on what actually had happened. And also American Congress hearings. And these interpreters, now the names are not known because the individual names have not been announced on the basis of political sensitivity. But they testified that they thought the American leaders had less enough pressure and sense of crisis against the threat posed by Japanese. So they thought it was their duty, their responsibility to interpret it as harsh as possible of Japanese intentions. That was wrong because they had to interpret accurately, and whether Japan was threatened or not should be understood by the decision makers. And that's how I emphasized at the beginning that accurate information should be collected before any decision making. And now people believe it's easier because you see Google translation system, Yahoo translation system, all those, and those companies are emphasizing that it's accurate translation, and commercially you have no choice, you have to say that, and people simply accept it. But is it true or not? And in present times, there was a term called shi-in-so-san. Shi-in-so-san. it was included in the Japanese telegrams at that time. Now, Shiiso-san's original meaning is originally a loan word from the Chinese language. And the Chinese language, there are a lot of Chinese vocabularies imported into Japanese language. And the term Shiiso-san means neglecting the duties of an office while taking pay. Means you are given a high position as official, and you are not doing any sufficient work, but you are getting salary for doing. And the Japanese ambassador in Washington worried a lot of himself, saying that I'm trying my efforts, my best efforts to reach an agreement with the US, but has never been. And therefore, I'm like Shiiso-san person, means that I'm paid as ambassador by the Japanese government, but the Japanese government aim at reaching an agreement has never been approached. So I like this. So I want to resign, and somebody else more effective should come to Washington DC. This was what he said in the telegram. And the Google search directs you to different Japanese language sites, and you can tell it is a 4-character idiom. There are 4 idioms there, and that is a typical Chinese words coming from classic legends. And if you put it in Google, what could happen? They would guide you into Chinese or Japanese. Into Chinese, it's translated corpse vegetarian meal. And in Japanese, dinner party. So nothing to do with this original meaning. And even now, this is the quality of internet automatic translation. So how at that time the magic interpreters faced difficulties, you can easily imagine. They had to do it by hand. So I cannot blame them, saying they intentionally created the war or whatever, that their mistake caused a huge number of deaths. I don't want to say that. And what is important is to realize how it's difficult to do. Another example is Keiichiro, another 4-character idiom. 4 syllables, it consists of 4 syllables. Originally a loan word from Chinese language, meaning do without saying, no show, just do it. Rather than I'm doing some, many politicians tend to be like that, I'm going to do and actually do nothing. But this proverb from China is saying, just do it without just showing off and saying. And grammatically, the 4-character idioms is in Chinese word order, which is not the same as Japanese word order. English and Chinese word order is subject, verb, object. And in Japanese, it's subject, object, verb. So it's different. So when you find these Chinese vocabularies in Japanese sentences, you must be careful how to translate it without being confused. And the fugen jikko, fu at the top, negative particle. And again means without saying and just do. So do without saying, that is the meaning. But in Japanese in general, negative particles are at the end of the sentence. So for instance, in English, when we say, we didn't go to the station yesterday. In Japanese, we went to the station yesterday, not. And therefore, when they try to translate Japanese vocabularies, sentences, they automatically put punctuation immediately after the negative term. And what could happen in this fugen jikko's case? They put immediately after fu. Then the rest of the part is becoming positive sentence rather than negative sentence. And that's how you can easily translate these sentences into opposite reversed meaning. And that's how these 3 disputing points were all mistranslated into opposite. And when you cannot handle it, then you have to interpret and explain your own opinion rather than translation itself. And this was not sabotage as a result of sabotage, but a failure of espionage in intelligence work. And it's recurring of human error. So the conclusion is that accurate human translation under pressure, like in the next 24 hours, 48 hours, whether it's war or peace, under such pressure it was impossible, and machine translation is still impossible. So all this should be started by the recognition of this phenomenon, what we cannot do. And in this case, the failure of diplomacy because of over-reliance on civil and the weakness of human. Because at that time, it's a pity to see that American ambassador Joseph Grew in Japan, who stayed in Japan for 10 years, sent telegrams, enormous number of telegrams to Washington, D.C. with surprisingly accurate information. For instance, the top level of 5 ministers meetings in front of the emperor, that was not known even by the rest of the ministers in Japan and no other Japanese population. However, he transmitted it accurately to Washington, D.C. And even now we don't know who out of 5 ministers communicated with his ambassador Joseph Grew. And nonetheless, he was regarded as a Japan leading person after 10 years of staying there. So DC did not accept what he was reporting, and rather inexperienced interpreter was reporting. That was accepted. And later, after the beginning of the war, Ambassador Grew went back to Washington and talked to the Secretary of State. And he was told that if you really felt so, why you hadn't flown over to Washington, D.C. to tell me directly. And at that stage, Joseph Grew found his enormous number of telegrams were never read seriously in Washington, D.C. and he was very, very angry. And this kind of misconception continued and eventually failed to keep a stable relationship between the US and Japan. Now, talking about modern times means this event is also historically in modern times, but at present day. Do we really understand our enemy? I put it in quotation because whether they are enemy or not should be carefully decided. First, they could be friendly, but when it's enemy, do we really understand our enemy, or are we fighting an illusion? That is a very important question we have to keep in mind all the time. In an ideological attack or conflict, there is always an enemy. We need enemy. But if the information gathered is misinterpreted and is misguided, it could result in unnecessary conflict, as we saw it here. When the image of the other is negative in diplomatic negotiation, the prefixed image could cause serious and decisive mistranslation. That is the lesson we have to learn from it. And for example, perception gaps. The question of terrorists, whether they are terrorists or freedom fighters. When I was in South Africa and met one closest friend of Nelson Mandela, and he was with Nelson Mandela for around 30 years in jail and suffered a lot. I asked him rather insensitively, why you fought before? Because they were arrested after their terrorist attacks. And the British government, for example, under Margaret Thatcher, condemned them as terrorists, and they are put in jail. And 30 years later, they are released. And after that, I met them. And this friend of Nelson Mandela replied, you really asked me why we fought? Yes, because we thought this society was wrong under apartheid, very severe racist social structure. That's why we fought. And we would not fight now, although still racism is there. Means politically it's abandoned, but economically still 40%, around 40% of African population are jobless, while white people from Europe are not. And therefore, economically, still racism is here. And some African origin people are arguing we have to fight back. However, we are not going to join them because, as someone there said, we have to cooperate with each other to build a better country. And therefore, it's not the time to fight. But if the society, we found the society was wrong, then we are going to fight again. That was what he said. And they called us terrorists. We called us freedom fighters. Now they call us freedom fighters. And he emphasized that whether we are terrorists or freedom fighters is depending on from which angle you are looking at, and over the same actions. We have never changed. What we have done is the same. But we are sometimes called freedom fighters, sometimes terrorists. So we must be very careful to define who are terrorists. And our country, South Africa, would never join American war on terror. And that actually happened. And another thing, when we are in the internet society, it's more dangerous time now. Although people believe through internet we are on a position better to communicate each other rather than before. And it's opposite. Empowers, provides, internet empowers, provides means encourage. The tool to individuals is diverse motivations and different sense of justice to fight their cause, positively or negatively. For example, it makes it easy to mobilize people like flash mob. Flash mob, you probably know very well. It started originally in the department in New York called Macy's. And certain people as shoppers shopping there knew that they are going to sing a certain song at a certain time, like from 3 o'clock this afternoon. Or the rest of the shopping customers, guests, did not know. And suddenly those people started to sing the same song. And the rest of people were surprised. And these people who were singing the same song did not know each other. But they were sharing the knowledge that they had to start to sing the same song. And this was used, for example, in China for the demonstrators. Because hinted with this, the demonstrators decided that at a certain time, let's say 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, we are all going to walk from the east to the west. But until then, there are lots of strangers walking on the same street. Some people knew it, some people did not. And the Chinese police could not do anything because when they capture anybody and ask why you are walking from the west to the east or east to the west, they would say just we are shopping, window shopping. Nobody would repeat it. But at a certain time, suddenly everybody started to move, which could cause chaos in security. And therefore, this was in a sense very effective. And more dangerous thing is so-called smart guerrilla attack. Means that several years ago, there was a terrorist attack on the parliament in Canada. And it happened several times. Means there are several different terrorist attacks in Canada. And then, immediately after that, in New York, some policemen were attacked. And in Palestine, some problem occurred. In Egypt, explosion. It's all happened immediately. And those terrorists did not know each other at all. But through internet, they are said that if one attack occurred, then it's the most effective to continue this. So those people who are ready to do for any reasons, not necessarily any fundamentalist or anybody, but who have some frustration with the society, they can start. And that is the flash mobs types of attacks. So flash mobs is not, it's art. It's nothing to do with terrorism, but it could be. And it explores boundaries between the physical and the virtual. This is the characteristics to internet society. And increasingly it blurs boundaries between the military and civilian, and the states and non-state actors, and the criminal and the terrorists. And attacks become increasingly indiscriminate, i.e., e.g. attack on infrastructure and military bases. So everybody could be involved in it. This is the society. Now another question is the use of different terminology, ethical and legal. For instance, in war on terror, the terrorists are called unlawful combatants. But if legally you declare the war, whatever it's declared the war on Japan, the war on the US, or war on terror, when you declare the war, the opposite fighters should be respected as warriors when they are captured, became POWs. But in war on terror, although it's under the law of war, and that means that any innocent civilians involved, still it's not a problem. That is a very delicate way of saying. But when you bomb in Afghanistan or Iraq and a number of casualties created and suffered, still none of the military who bombed those cities would be in charge. None of them are going to be charged because it's under the law of war, not under the law of peacetime. And nonetheless, when the so-called terrorists are captured, they are not seen as proper warriors to be respected, and they are called unlawful combatants. So if you use unlawful combatants rather than POWs, is it okay to torture them? That is the question. In a similar way, after the Second World War, Japanese leaders were prosecuted of its misbehaviors on Western POWs. However, Japanese POWs were treated as Japanese surrendered personnel. Therefore, they are not POWs, so not necessary to be respected. And they were not treated properly at all. And even now, it's nothing legally causing any troubles. However, this is some point the Japanese and the Western side have never agreed. So this is another question of what in war and peacetime problem. And the same problem can be got at any time in public sector individual decision-making process. For information gathering collection, it's a city and human. Actually, if humans was properly involved in addition to seeing, this kind of problem could be less occurring, far less occurring. And if the information is misguided, then analysis, judgment, evaluation, and then appeasement and attack. We have to decide whether it's appeasement situation or attacking situation. We have to decide. And if the information is misguided, effective decision cannot be made. This is what we learn. And finally, food for thought. How do we balance maintaining a democracy, countering terrorism, and not becoming a surveillance state? We don't want to have a surveillance state. However, if it's completely free, then we cannot protect people from terrorism. Do we actually understand our enemy? If we don't know what they are thinking and what they want, then how we can adopt or how we can make any decision making to face it? Either Japanese, it's not terrorist, but Japan as an enemy, how the US could decide, and Japan the same. The US, if the US was enemy, then how Japan could decide without knowing American intention? And actually, in this case, because the national interests were shared, they are even not enemies each other. And what are the intentions of terrorists? And if they are fighting a cause that are sometimes legitimate in hindsight, under oppression, for example, how do you create a way to deal with the problem without going to war? And there are plenty of examples. For example, in Kosovo, after the end of the Cold War, the independence movement was conducted by KLA, Kosovo Liberation Army. At that time, we called them extremists. But now, KLA is forming the government of independent Kosovo. So it's always an art. So how we can decide it? Does international law provide a platform to effectively manage these issues? That is a real question I want to put here, offer here. And this is the book I wrote on the basis of my analysis of doctrine. And here, this kanji is said gokuhi, strictly confidential. And interestingly about this vocabulary, because I started to work, as I introduced myself at the beginning of today's session, I worked for the Department of Trade and Industry. And that means that I had to negotiate with the Japanese government for the British interest, although I am Japanese national. And during the time, Japan provided me their own computer on my desk, and the British side also provided a computer to me. And for the same subject, they are negotiating from the opposite side, and the one said, the English side, strictly confidential. Japanese side said gokuhi, which means strictly confidential. So I asked my colleagues, it's a kind of a joke, saying that if I connected these two computers, how much can I earn? And they said, before that, you are going to be arrested. And that is the situation. So, and here is a symbolic thing. It's in 2001, immediately after 9/11 attack, ground zero. This is a picture broadcast in the US. That came from US-Japan war in Iwo Jima in 1945. But is it a proper analogy? That is my question, big question. Thank you very much for my presentation. It's relatively long.
Thank you. Very stimulating.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing undergrad, that one of the questions coming up, whether like Pearl Harbor and 9/11, is there any miscommunication in the intelligence communities? So it's very interesting. It's refreshed my memories of this course as well. And I did not know that it's the person, but the people who was in person during World War II by the Japanese is being classed as a Japanese surrender personnel, not the personnel of war, which is quite interesting on that. And yeah, and you talk about the computer. I have experience working in MP office, and and it's clearly they are very, very strict on computer. So everybody have their own computer, and they have their own password and setting and stuff. So nobody should use it. However, when you have very lack of stuff, people somehow misuse it. And I understand that because of the system of the British confidential system, and you can't transfer to another country. So it's something that you learn from it like that. And with magic as well, as you say, is a mechanism like an enigma. And especially Japanese translation and the words and stuff, it's very interesting. And we still have this problem, even though like in 9/11, I'm not sure I can compare with that. But from what I did study the decision-making theory. So the problem with this is during World War II or before the Japanese-American War, I think the people who collected intelligence information were in military sectors. You don't have the CIA. CIA came after 1945. And I'm not sure about FBI intelligence or something like that. However, in these times, on the 9/11, you have the CIA, which it did collect information, but they should to ignore it.
Yeah. Yes, that is a very good point. And before the end of the Second World War, before establishing CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, what kind of people were involved in this translation? Was first Naval Intelligence Office and Army Intelligence Office. And one group was involved on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the other on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And therefore, the continuity of 2 days from Monday to Tuesday in itself was missed. So the Tuesday interpreter did not know the context of Monday situation. That was one problem. And also there was a routine, personnel routine called Manchu by the Americans. And many fluent Japanese speakers were in the front outside the interpreting works. And many of them supposed to be some priests who stayed in Japan before and studied Japanese a little bit. So there are many basic level of translation could be seen. And I felt it's like my own English mistranslation in the English exam at high school. That sort of thing. And in comparison, British intelligence did marvelous job. And they are well trained to write it down very clearly. If there is any word or sentence they are not sure, then they have to put footnote of this. And the pity thing is that in comparison with the American case, which released most of the translated scripts, the British have never done it. So we can compare it with only small piece of British translations mistakenly released by the Australians or something. And therefore, we cannot compare that on a fair basis between the two. But it's very clear that British level was much higher than that of the American. But in this case, Britain was not a major participant to negotiate with Japan. That was a big issue. And now CIA is there. However, it's very questionable whether they can translate of the diplomatic messages on this level or not. Because you need to know very subtlety, delicate vocabularies. And when you said enigma, is it the German code?
Yes.
Yes. And the German codes, it's true, probably for the British side, decoding of enigma, German coded messages, was very helpful for the British military planning. However, two things. One is that it's a military communication. Enigma was simply military communication. And the military communication was just saying which day, where, what do you do, and nothing more than that. So there was no delicate diplomatic expression. In the case of diplomatic side, it's very different, such as Shiiso Sama or Furendiko could be involved in those messages. And also, even within the UK, I experienced myself that delicacy. For instance, foreign office, in proper foreign office expression. When my colleague in foreign office would say, would travel to the US, for example, business mission, and I did not hear directly from that past friend, and someone, the third party, told me he is going to go to the US. In that case, what I have to write to him in a proper foreign office message is that I learned you are going to go to the US. Means I am not on a position to say you directly let me know. So I'm not 100% sure, but I'm almost sure you are going. And in the DTI, with the industries, always communicating directly and in a urgent situation. It's a very different terminology. For instance, in American break style, it started from number 2. And I thought immediately after I joined the British department, I thought I could correct those British officials of their English expression. So I said in the meeting, hey, I found your number 1 is missed. And then they laughed at me and said, you don't know the DTI style. Because we are very busy, it's clear, before number 2 is always number 1. So we omitted number 1. That sort of. So the style is very, very different. And therefore, in the case of enigma of the military communications and the magic of the diplomatic communications is very different. And also when we are talking about SOV or SVO, if the language is more different, means German and English is still in Indo-European language within the category of. Japan is not.
Yeah.
Japan is not. So when the languages are different, we cannot generalize the efficacy between the different languages. That is the point I think.
Sorry, yeah, of course.
Actually, what do you mean?
Yeah.
The word magic and the Pacific word. I couldn't understand.
Yeah. At the beginning, I gave you some definition, but I will explain a little more.
Can you go back to the definitions? Because we're going to have a little exam after this. I'm preparing. So
Because it's in the really beginning. So that is a very good question indeed. This American decoded messages of Japanese coded diplomatic messages, i.e., when the Japanese foreign office based in Tokyo is sending some telegrams to instruct what to say next for the Japan's ambassador based in Washington, D.C. to the American officials. What is happening is that American officials would propose something. Then Japanese ambassador would ask Tokyo how to reply to that. And then Tokyo would discuss within their ministry and then reply to the ambassador, hey, say this tomorrow. And that communication should not be read by the advisors, i.e. American diplomats in this case, because if they knew what Japanese ambassador is going to tell them, then it's not a negotiation anymore. Japan is always on a disadvantageous position. So it should not be read.
That means it is a diplomatic communication.
That's right, that's right. And Americans successfully decoded the coded diplomatic message exchanged between Tokyo and the Japanese ambassador in Washington, D.C. And that intelligence activities, secretly reading what Japanese were communicating, were codenamed as magic. And initially, it was a very wide definition, means any interpreters were called also magic. The activities of decoding Japanese messages itself was called magic, and translated sentences were also called magic. But nowadays, it's narrower. It's almost always narrower definition, saying the decoded and translated message in English, originally from Japanese, is now called magic. And of course, this term is no longer used when the Americans are interpreting Japanese diplomatic codes now. We know they are decoding all the time, but they are not giving this code name anymore. This was until after, several years after the end of the American and Second World War, US continued to use it. But revealing, after magic was revealed, the existence of magic was revealed, they changed the name, and several times. By the way, a Japanese side also decoded American diplomatic messages. And now we know that the level of decoding was almost the same, technically, the same between the US and Japan. And the pity thing is that even when Japan was decoding American messages, still they did not find the Americans were already mistranslating and misunderstanding. And I thought if Japanese side decoded it, Then why they couldn't find it? That is a huge problem, and the Japanese side was very insensitive. For example, Japanese top diplomatic code now called Magic, was decoded, and that was found by German spy based in New York. And he sent it to Berlin, to Rome, that our information is strictly confidential, and Americans couldn't find our diplomatic message, only military message, but not diplomatic message. And this information, secret information, can be read by the American through Japanese communications, because Japan was part of the tripartite pact. And then the German foreign minister, Ribbentrop, called the Japanese ambassador to Germany, called Oshima. And he was told that Japanese top secret diplomatic messages are read by the Americans. And then, surprisingly, this man, originally from the army, he was General Oshima, and now professional diplomat. So he had to be on the position, the most expert of this sensitivity of decoding and coding and decoding. He surprisingly used the same code for reporting it back to Tokyo. So the US could easily read it. And then Tokyo foreign minister used the same code to let Nomura ambassador in Washington to investigate it. And this ambassador was not sensitive enough to move immediately and didn't reply for the next 1 month. And then Foreign Minister Togo sent the same coded message to them, to the ambassador, to remind him. And then he replied in the same code, saying that it's nothing a problem because our code makers are working very hard. And working very hard doesn't guarantee you are not. So they almost didn't care. And not only that, Winston Churchill, the then Prime Minister in the UK, said later in his memoir, the Japanese top secret code was the easiest to read because Japanese ambassador based in London was usually use the top secret code when he was reporting to Tokyo, including my public speech in the parliament. And in the UK, the interpreters and code breakers were told that don't use top secret message codes often, because if the volume of samples are increasing, then it's easier to be decoded. Therefore, don't use the top secret unless it's a real top secret. But the Japanese ambassador did not care. He looks like he did not care, because if you are posted in London and some other colleagues in Washington or Moscow or anywhere else, and from Tokyo's point of view, if you send more number of top secret messages report back, then as if you are very effectively working. So they are looking at the Tokyo headquarters rather than any other country. And so culturally it's happening, even now, the same situation. And culturally, probably some of you know, from the early 17th century to the late 19th century, for over 2.5 centuries, Japan had very strict seclusion policy, under-seclusion policy. And in the late 16th century, the Japanese traders of 100,000 were spread out in the Southeast Asia, and Japanese export to Europe was enormous. However, the new shogunate set up in the early 17th century said that by a certain date you have to come back. If you don't come back, then you stay there forever. And after that, for 2.5 centuries, if any fisherman made a mistake and rode on the tide to reach Russia, then you are not allowed to come in. And only the Dutch people and the Chinese people with special permission could land in Japan, but no the rest of the nationalities. And during the time, Japan enjoyed enormous peaceful time and a very quick economic development. So even now, many of Japanese feel some nostalgia to the happy, secluded time, without any noise of the foreign policies and diplomatic programs. So they want to stay on their own. And with this kind of cultural mentality, makes them very insensitive to communicate in coded message, because if you are completely in isolated island, and that means that you are acquaintance each other in some sense, and single languages, and you can communicate anywhere in Japanese territories, then you don't need to code messages, because anyway you are friends and acquaintance and no civil wars, nothing wrong. And therefore, from mental point of view or ethics, I must say, it's not, how to say, suitable for them to manage these codings and decodings. So it's going to continue. Only 1.5 centuries have passed after Japan opened the country. After 2.5 centuries, they were secluded. So it's too early for us to expect Japanese to handle this properly.
You've done a lot of work, it's very commendable, and it's opened a new sort of dimension in how worlds are.
But by the way, on this view, I thoroughly enjoyed your explanation about how India became independent,
right,
and the Gandhi situation on a different perspective from Britain and India.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
I was at a conference in Lucy, this was in 2008 or so, and there was the head of the section which deals with anti-terrorism in the Home Office, not the police.
Lucy in London.
Lucy, is a think tank here.
Yes, in London. Yes.
In London.
Yes.
And she said, she identified 5 reasons why Al-Qaeda is a danger. Okay? The one at the top was, Al-Qaeda's mission is to convert the whole of the world into Islam. Okay? So when it came to questions, I said, look, are you not making things up? In Helmand, where Al-Qaeda and Taliban are most present, there are a lot of Sikhs there. If they haven't bothered to convert us into Islam, why do you think they're sitting down there saying, Muhammad, we must go and convert the Queen into Islam? What's this nonsense? Where is this coming from that their mission is to convert all of Islam? And she had no answer, she sort of went incoherently. The point I'm saying is, and I've said this in international forums as well, there is no other people in the world who have so much lust for war as the British have. For the last 500 years, year in, year out, we cannot name a single year apart from 1946 when there was war fatigue, that the British Crown has not been at war with someone or other. And you can almost, when you're sitting in Lucy, you can almost sense where the British are thinking of going to war next. Not have to go to war next, we're thinking of going to war next. Okay? And you can tell from BBC where the establishment is thinking of going to war next. The way that the BBC comes in. So, my question is, yes, interpretation. How much is sometimes a willingness or deliberate intention of the institutions to misread things, as this lady was saying, the whole hall was full of generals and army people and people from the government, etc. They were nodding, yes, that's what Al-Qaeda wants. I challenge that Al-Qaeda doesn't want that. All Al-Qaeda wants is what you would want in the Vatican. They would just want you to get out of Saudi Arabia and their holy places. Yes. Right? Yes. That's all they want. So why don't you negotiate that? And who says they want to convert you here, the whole of Britain, into Islam? They're stupid. And in America as well, there was an article which came in the Observer that was killed the next time. It was a two-part article on how Iran manipulated the intentions and prejudices and the conflicts between different American intelligence agencies to get America to start the war on Iraq. So they had 4 people who had been working very closely with Saddam Hussein, and then those 4 people defected to America. Each one of them defected to different agencies, one to CIA, one to Pentagon, one to FBI, one to the State Department or something like that. And each one of them had the context of the story was the same, but the versions were slightly different. That Saddam Hussein had really sort of built his nuclear weapon program. It was this advanced, the other one would say it was slightly less advanced, another one would say that's where the things are. And American intelligence services, before the Homeland Security system came, were competing with each other. And each was saying we have a special source, and they would not reveal to the other what the special source was. The special source was the agents that Iran had sent them. And each one, the whole establishment, did not look deeper into the context in which these people were saying, why they were saying, and they built the whole image of Saddam Hussein building weapons of nuclear.
Yes.
Yes. And the Americans attacked Iraq, which served the Iranians.
Yes.
It did the Iranians work for them.
Yes.
So, translation, how much is there is a subjective intention to
Yes.
misread translation?
Yes, that is a very interesting point. And in this case, what I discovered is that the Japanese military was 100% sure they are going to be defeated if they fought against the US. One army officer based in Washington, D.C., reported back to Tokyo immediately before the beginning of the war that Japan's production capacity is 1 out of 573 with the Americans. So how we can continue to fight? Initially, probably we can do something, but we cannot continue to fight and eventually defeat. The naval top leader, Admiral Yamamoto, who conducted the Pearl Harbor attack, also said that if we fought, then we are going to be bound at least 10 nuclear bombs, weapons. So it's impossible to win. And under the circumstances, at least on the Japan side, they are scared to fight with the Americans. No way to be confident enough to win the war. And on the US side, I found that until up to only 1 week before Pearl Harbor, the American Army and Navy repeatedly, again and again, reported to Roosevelt, keep Japan out of the war because we have to concentrate on Germany. And they are not sure if they fought on 2 fronts with Germany and Japan, whether they can survive in a proper way. And President Roosevelt himself said, I don't know about Far Eastern situation at all. So there was no motivation for them. Nobody wanted to fight, but they are scared of each other. So under the circumstances, I'm not saying they are pacifists at all, or they are peace-loving people. But because of their interest, self-interest, nobody was on the position to feel they wanted to fight. That is one thing. And Al-Qaeda case, I think it's interesting because one female scholar in Chatham House immediately after 9/11 reported to us that she had interviewed Al-Qaeda leader, I forgot the name, Osama bin Laden. Yes, Osama bin Laden. She asked him, you are expert from Saudi Arabia. Do you really still think you are Saudi Arabian? And he said, I'm Hijazi. And she suddenly realized his identity is neither Saudi Arabian nor Afghan, but Hijazi. And that came to me very quickly, that the kingdom of Hijaz became independent immediately after the First World War. And in the British Foreign Office, there are two factions in support of the Kingdom of Hejaz and against groups existed. And the pro-Saudi group against the Kingdom of Hejaz plotted cheated to remove the army of the Hejaz to the other place, and then the British side supported the Saudi army to invade into Hejaz kingdom. And now, if you look at the location of the cities like Mecca, Medina, and Jeddah, they are all in the territory of the Hejaz kingdom. And they have particular special identity as Hejaz against Saudis. And this area is very advanced during the Ottoman Empire's territory time. Very culturally and economically advanced against the mainland of Saudi Arabia. Therefore, they have very strong pride and they are not comfortable to be ruled by the so-called primitive Saudi people. And therefore, since then, there have been independence movement all the time, but Saudi was surprisingly strong enough to keep the grip over the Hijazi territory. And they started to look at why. Then it's the US backing of Saudi Arabia. Otherwise, Saudi would not be that strong, particularly that primitive people in their definition. And therefore, Al-Qaeda, particularly Osama bin Laden's motivation was to fight back the Americans first. And then if America is weakened, then Saudi will be weakened. But if you insist on independence of Hejaz only, then you cannot get enough fighters for the independence because all the non-Hejazis do not care. So he used the more universal ideology, that is Islam. And therefore, his initial motivation to fight was nothing to do with Islamism, but just for local independence. And sometimes I mention it to the American officials, and their reaction is interesting. They are saying that if we knew it, we had some other ways. We can do something. Of course, that in that case, Saudi and American relationship could be more complicated, but the US did not want to be involved in this kind of huge, similar to, close to the Third World War in the future. So your point is very interesting. And again, who wants to fight? And some people want to fight. That is true. And in this case, Japan-US relationship, I had some funny experience. Because when I was facing examiners at Oxford, eventually 16 appeared. And I spent 1 year to discuss with them all over, nearly 300 questions given by them. And their basic idea is that this cause of war is entirely because of Japanese expansionism and militarism and the totalitarian sense of values and so on and so on. Japan as invaders, that is the real problem. And what you are saying is that some interpreters made a mistake and it's just a minor, as if it's a minor cause and so on and so on. And therefore I had to discuss a lot with them. And after being granted the degree, I went back to Japan. And then many scholars in Japan asked me simply, how long have you been in the West? You are already leaning to the Western side. And their argument is that obviously President Roosevelt had known Japanese military plan for attacking on Hawaii. And he imposed oil sanctions against Japan to force them to start to attack. And that was on purpose to let America get in the war between Britain and Germany to help Britain. Therefore, in your thesis, it's lacked. So, in the West, they believe that Japanese military wanted to fight, and Japanese scholars tend to think President Roosevelt wanted to fight. However, and it's true, and in a sense, I'm not saying true, but in theory, that can happen. That could have happened. However, there was no evidence of it, and my investigation on and on, only the reluctant attitude of the law could be found more and more. And I said, I came back to the UK and talked to my supervisor who helped me for this research and said that after, I was suffering a lot with the British examiners. And then in Japan, I faced a lot of Japanese scholars. And he said, that is good, because that means you are in balance and you are in neutral position. And I said, probably it's true, but I'm losing friends from both sides. So it's a very interesting point, I think.
Well, thank you very much. It's excellent enlightenment for everybody.
Thank you
you.
very much for your attention.
Thank you.